geographical features of different ethnicities, and of course that would be a little bit against the criticizing Japanese society in general. It's a little bit risky for the politically correct left. The other thing is, but there are also things that they would be very much praised, and are indeed very much praised by the European, Western European and Eastern European as well, right-wingers. For instance, Japanese society is practically totally impregnated to leftist radical ideology. First and foremost, Japanese society is still very feudal in some sort of ways. For instance, they still believe in hierarchy. They still think that the boss is by definition, because he's a boss in the company, for instance, is wiser and has much more, even morally in some way wiser, and you should be listened to. The same applies to the old age. The same applies to grey or white hair, for instance. But in the same time, Japanese has a very rational regulation when it comes to the wise and the old in the same time. For instance, there would be the situation in which we have, for instance, in Poland, our former president Lech Wałęsa is pontificating all the time about his own genius and criticizing all the actual governments of all the current governments of Poland, and going from lecture to lecture. He's very highly paid to criticize them and to praise his own genius. That would be impossible in Japan, because the ex-prime minister is only ex-prime minister, and it shows when prime minister resigns that he would become and he becomes really an ordinary citizen, not very much encouraged to profess his own opinions about current political events, far from it. So I think this approach is far more rational than the Western European approach towards the elderly ex-leaders, political leaders. The other thing is, for instance, the Japanese caution towards immigrants. It's not that Japanese society is not welcoming new ideas and not welcoming foreigners. Japanese society is much more diverse sometimes when it comes to ideas. And although, for instance, psychiatry in the European sense is very much derogated by the Japanese elites, intellectual elites, but in the same time they are welcoming very many new ideas. There are also Japanese people who are living according to the European lifestyle. They are called, or lefty American approach towards life, like they are called furita, free men. And these furita, they mostly their interest lies mostly in their own passions, in their own hobbies. They are not so much concentrated on work, on a stable, on being employed on a constant basis. They are more passion-oriented, creative. Both those who are really doing something, bringing money with their creativity, like art and some things like that, and those who are like so-called losers in our playing video games in their basements. So the Japanese society is very diverse when it comes to ideas, and not so much diverse when it comes to ethnicity. And I think that this diversity is far more important for the development of a nation than thinking. For instance, European countries have a great problem with the lack of diversity of thought and philosophical approach. For instance, the main reason is because, unlike the USA and unlike Japan, there are very small number of private-owned research institutes in Europe. There is one in Köln in Germany, and that's practically it. there are very small number of real strong scientific private institutions in Europe, and there is no such problems in the United States and in Japan. So especially in the United States, because